gone to sleep. There we go. Yes. No. There we go. Hello. Hello. This guy is called Tony Ronaldo, and this is the story of FMNR. It starts in Nigeria, that's the north of Africa. The little circle there is around Egypt, where Joe and Joe live and work, yay. And the big orange band across there is the Sahara Desert. Just below that is what some geologists call sub-Saharan Africa, but over there they call it the Sahel. And that is Nigeria. See how much of it is in the Sahara? Well, that guy, Tony Ronaldo, went there as an agronomist in 1981. He says that at that time, Nigeria was on the brink of ecological collapse. The Sahara was forever marching southward. They had wind speeds of up to 70 kilometres an hour. 70 kilometres an hour through all that sand. He said he was trying to help people who were farmers. He was an agronomist. And anything you planted and came up got sandblasted. The soil temperature could be 60 degrees. It's just shocking. It's just an incredible environment. Their rainfall could be between 2 and 4 inches in a year. And so that if they ever did get any rain, they got an explosion of pests because there was a lack of biodiversity. There's no birds to eat the locusts, if you like. And he says that the worst thing of all about living there and working there, the worst desolation, even worse than the countryside, was to see the people. Because for several generations now, they had been a people who were without hope. They were completely desperate. They felt like they'd been forgotten by everyone else around them. And they're surrounded by other countries below them that were rain-rich, soil-rich countries. They had a moratorium on missions in Nigeria. They kicked them all out and said no more missionaries. But Tony Ronaldo was a missionary. He had faith. He went there with agronomist on his passport. But he was a man of faith. He certainly felt for the people who lived there, they felt they'd been forgotten by God. Like he hadn't cared for them. They were unprovided for. They'd been abandoned by him. And it made it hard to be a missionary there. These people faced starvation and poverty and disease and a land that just refused to grow crops. And it was in an ever-worsening downward spiral. Every year it got hotter and drier and worse. When he went there, he went to a town of Maradi, and he was working on the Maradi Windbreak and Woodlot project. So they were going to teach people to build a little swale in the soil and catch water and grow windbreak trees and then be able to grow their crops in the lee of those trees. Tried for years. Took all his university knowledge and training with him, tried for years. Nothing worked. Every single thing he planted died. It all died. The locals there came to call him the Mad White Farmer. One day he was driving and he had to cross a particularly desert patch, and he stopped to let the air down in his tyres because you could get bogged in the sand if you didn't run with very flat tyres. And as he stopped and looked out from where he paused, north, south, east and west, in every direction he looked, there was not a single tree in sight, not one. And that's what he'd been trying to do, was grow trees, because that was the secret to returning the quality of the soil. Not one. And he started thinking, what would it take? I mean, what if we had billions of dollars at our disposal? An unlimited supply of money. What if we could truck in great big trucks with water? What if we had hundreds of thousands of hours and thousands of labourers who would do everything we said? What if we did that? It still wouldn't work. The soil's just so hot. The wind is so fast. It wouldn't work. And there by the side of the road, he talks about a feeling of overwhelming despair. Even if he had everything, this wasn't going to work. And in that despair, he prayed. And standing there feeling hopeless, he looked around him and there was something growing in the ground, probably one of those little thorn weeds that grow. But he's an agriculturalist, he's an agronomist, so he got out his little pocket knife and went over to have a look. And when he went down and had a look, he got a surprise. It wasn't the little thorn thing, but it was a shoot. It was a shoot of a native tree growing there in the middle of the desert. That's odd, shouldn't really be able to do that. And he suddenly had a shocking realization that under the sand, under his feet, there was a massive underground forest of tree stumps from 3-4 generations ago when this land had been cleared. The tree stumps were all still there. And they weren't dead. They were alive. And that was the beginning of FMNR, which stands for Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration. He taught local people to find the hidden live stumps that were already there under the ground to nurture and prune the tree that grew. So when you nurture it, 75 little shoots will come up and you prune them all off and you just keep one, the central one that's a good shape. And they found that the trees actually draw up water into the soil and everything changed. These are some before and after shots. Nigeria, when he arrived, and what it looks like today. This is, the first photo is from 2016, from the year 2000. And the photo with all the large trees is 10 years later, in 2016, 16 years later. This is a satellite photo. That was in a year when they had rain, so the river was running. This photo is from 10 years later, even in a year where they didn't have rain. All those black dots are trees. They're trees. A Dutch geographer said, this is possibly the largest single environmental change in West Africa, if not all of Africa. This is extraordinary. There are now 25 countries. This is so much bigger than Nigeria. 25 other countries that are using FMNR as a process to reforesting. They nicknamed this guy the forest maker. 5 million hectares is under this kind of cultivation. And there are 200 million trees growing, where before there were none. And they did not plant a single one of them. They didn't plant any of them. And all you need, not billions of dollars, not truckloads of water, a pocket knife. Isn't that great? And he said, the best change of all is in the people. He reversed that downward spiral of loss and grief into an upward spiral of increase. They have more resources available to them. There is more biodiversity. It's coming back to the land. The birds and the other creatures are coming back. They have more comparative wealth. They have more options about what they could do with their life, what they could do with the land. They have hope. They have hope. He's able to reveal to people all the rich gifts that God has given. They were all there already, hidden in the soil under their feet. And that makes it easy to say to them, you are not abandoned by God. You are not forgotten. You are loved and known, and God has provided for you abundantly. There are 2 Bible texts I want to have a look at, one from the Old Testament and one from the New, one from Moses, who turned aside to look, and one from Peter, who taught a thing that he knew from hard experience. And the reading about Moses comes from Exodus chapter 3. It's the first 6 verses. I wonder if you would read with me the words in red. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Those are the things God said to Moses when he called him. Tony, like Moses, was in the desert. That's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to have a flock. It's a hard place to grow a crop. It's a hard place to be. And he turned aside to look at a plant. Both Tony and Moses did that. And it's odd in the passage how that gets repeated. Moses said, I will turn aside to look. And God said, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him. And I was reading that and it made me wonder a little bit, why did that mean something to God? This turning aside to look. What's so great about that? Sometimes in life there are monstrous things that are in front of us that we have to deal with. They're big. It's a huge problem. It's a Goliath of a thing. It's dreadful and it occupies all our attention and our thoughts go round and around and around it. And we think about it a lot. We might lie awake at night mulling over it. It's mesmerising and it seems to breed its own special kind of despair. And it can be very hard to turn aside from that and look at what God is doing. It can be very hard to shift your attention. And Moses, like Tony, when he turned aside, he met the God who says, I am your father. I listened to quite a number of interviews with Tony Ronaldo when I was preparing for this sermon. And I heard one where he described his prayer that day, standing beside his vehicle, looking out into the desert. He said to God, you are our Father, Jehovah Jireh, our provider. Look at this. You show me how you have provided for us in Nigeria. How can I be a missionary and say that to people? You show me. And God showed him more than he ever dreamed. God showed him more than just Nigeria, 25 other countries. In the face of the mighty Sahara, the power of those winds and the heat of the ground, in the face of despair and poverty and death, God showed him hope and riches and life. The second passage is from Peter, who taught a thing that he knew from experience. It's very short. It's in 2 Peter chapter 1, and the third verse says, his divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness. Everything. Everything you need for life and for godliness, for our physical life, our being, and for that deep inner spiritual life where we connect to God. He's given you everything you need for small L-I-F-E and everything you need for capital L-I-F-E. What did it mean to Peter when he wrote that sentence? Peter. Good old Peter. I'm so glad he's there. I'm so glad they weren't all really great, neat, thoughtful, perfect guys whose socks always stayed up. I'm so glad there was Peter. Spontaneous Peter, emotional Peter, outbursty Peter, independent Peter, sometimes defiant Peter, very often foot in mouth Peter, who says, and with all of those leave you, I won't leave you. And within a couple of hours, he's denied 3 times that he even knew who Jesus was. Good old Peter, who knew what it meant to get forgiven if the worst person in the room was you. If if the biggest mess was yours, maybe sometimes the monster is within. Maybe sometimes the monster is me. And in spite of monsters, in spite of difficulties, even if it's you, he says, I have given you everything you need for life and godliness. Everything. Church history brims with examples of this sort of thing. From the 1st to the 4th century, within 50 years of Jesus' death, Christians were persecuted. They suffered torture and crucifixion and beheading. They were burned and fed to beasts. They were stripped of property, and property that belonged to them as a group, what we would call church property, was destroyed. And so they went underground. They went into the catacombs in Rome. And then because Rome was a place of peace, and it built roads, they could follow the roads out when they fled the city under Nero, when they left. And you can track the development of the early church along the roads of Rome, along the Appian Way, along the pathways out through all the other countries. And they lived under there. This is a painting from the catacombs of Rome of an agape feast of the persecuted Christians hiding under the ground there, from which they spread out. It looked like an awful destruction. It looked like the end of Christianity, but it wasn't, because God gives his people everything they need for life and godliness. In the 1940s in China, they instituted a moratorium on missionaries. They kicked them out. And from then until about 1954-55, missionaries were expelled from the country. The Christian missions and organisations at that time said, this is a disaster. This is the end of Christian faith in China. But God provides his people with everything they need for life and for godliness. The current count is about 68 million people. China is on target within the next 15 years to become the most Christian country on the planet. Everything they need for life and godliness. This is a picture from Ukraine. It was taken about a year ago. Beautiful. The Orthodox churches in Ukraine are beautiful. This picture was taken a month ago. Looks like a disaster. Looks like the destruction and the loss of faith. Looks like it's all getting blown to bits. And in spite of how it looks, God says, they give my people everything they need for life and godliness. I've seen a little video of people underground hiding underneath the city of Ukraine and singing by the light of their phone, singing songs of faith. I don't know what will happen in the Ukraine. I don't know, but I feel really confident of this. Godliness and faith will thrive. I feel confident in that. I think people will sing songs of hope in the desert. In spite of the Sahara and Rome and China and Russia and all the big monsters that we have in the world. And there's a lot of monsters. Some things are monsters to whole nations. Some things are monsters to individuals. Grief is a monster. Loss. Just knocks you over. It's a monster. Pain, living with pain every day. That's a monster. You can't stop it. Sometimes things happen in families, and it's monstrous. It's heartbreaking. Sometimes change and decay in all around us. Oh, thou who changes not, abide with me, says the song. Regrets can be a monster. Things from within you that you did from your past that you wish you hadn't done. It can be a monster. Decline. Old age is not for sissies. you can't stop it. Inside, I'm about 27. And I can't stop it. There's nothing you can do. It's just a monster of a thing. And it can be really hard when it goes round and round in your thoughts to turn aside from that and look at what your Father has promised. Look at what he has given. And I found this other lovely passage, like the call of Moses. The prophet Isaiah had a call. He who wrote those verses that we read this morning, who saw those things about the coming of Jesus. And when he was called in Isaiah 6, he says some great things. He says, I saw the Lord, and the train filled the temple. And then the Lord says to him, who will go? Who shall I send? And Isaiah says, I will go, send me. And he says, well, go and tell this people they'll be ever hearing but never understanding. They'll see things but they won't get it. They won't understand it. And he talks about that for a while. And Isaiah says, for how long? And the Lord says, until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant. Until the houses are left deserted and the fields are ruined and ravaged. Until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a remnant remains in the land, it will be laid waste. It will be a desert. It'll be a monster. It'll be like the Sahara. And when it's like that, and then he says this thing, as the terebinth and the oak leaf stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be a stump in the land. And the faithful people of God are compared to a big tree stump in the ground that's still full of the life that God originally gave it, that's still able to sprout and give inspiration and shade and nutrition to those who come after. That's still a source of encouragement and inspiration. A stump. Agronomists tell me, I looked this up, that if you cut it down and it stays there under the ground, a stump can live for 100 years. Isn't that incredible? It can live for 100 years under there. This church, under the ground and above the ground, there are mighty stumps. We have a forest beneath our feet. And it's not one you can always see, but it's there. There is life here, hidden beneath our feet. In Boonah, I've heard people say the church is getting old. We're getting old. We're all getting old. We're getting frail. We're dying off. And I've heard this church won't grow unless we get children here and families. This church won't grow unless we get more money. This church won't grow unless this town grows. Bit of a monster. What can you do? We can't all get younger. This church has a history, an extraordinary history of missions, both local and overseas. This church has a history of youth work. There were 70 kids in the hall one night when I came here. Noisy, hungry, ridiculous, teenagers all over there. This church has an incredible history of youth work and children's work and ministry in this town. And here be giants. Here be giants. Billy McCauley, who sat in the second row and taught us what it was to be a gentleman of God. Rob Warwick, full of vision and inspiration and courage to go and take risks, and his wife, who teaches us to pray. And Rita, full of love and optimism. You couldn't keep that girl down. And Renee was full of joy. Her favourite song, Joy's the flag flown high in the castle of my heart, who sang, full of joy. Emma, born with a real learning challenge, who showed us that you can never be challenged so that you are not God's person in God's place at God's time. Margaret, who loved and sewed and gave to people in India. Joe, who said Egypt's not too far away. And Fran and her family, who worked among Aboriginal communities for years, and the Rubies, who go off in Ethiopia and do amazing things, and Michelle, who changes people's lives as a chaplain in schools and as some kind of a chaplain in communities who does amazing things. Irene, who's still a chaplain in schools. Tan and Andrew, who are building a youth group. They're having so much fun. They're doing such great things. And Shiloh and rickshaws and bicycles and the Grumps and Days for Girls and catering and cooking and feeding and loving and caring and giving and sharing life. Here be giants. turn aside and look. And God takes notice when you do that. God takes notice when you do that. And he reveals himself as our Father. Our Father in whom we have hope, because he has given us everything we need for life and for godliness. Unseen forests beneath our feet. And as Paul and I leave here and go away, we ride on the shoulders of giants. And you have been a home to us and a support. You are friends and guides and prayers and counselors. You listen and you love and you give. And we are profoundly thankful.